We are looking at question 2 from your free response 4 assignment. In question 2, we're given production possibilities frontier curve. It's concave, and we have consumer goods on the vertical axis and capital goods on the horizontal axis. And the first question we're being asked is, does this show does this show, or does this graph or diagram exhibit increasing opportunity cost for consumer goods only, capital goods only, both goods, or neither? So does this diagram exhibit increasing opportunity cost for both of the goods that are on the vertical and horizontal axis? And the short answer is yes, they are. But I want to show you why that is as sort of a review here. Because this curve is shaped like it is, it's shaped concave. It's got a constantly changing slope. So that would tell us that the opportunity cost, which is defined by the slope of the curve, is also constantly changing. And we can show that if we look at moving from this point right here to this point right here. What are we doing? Well, we're gaining. We're producing more capital goods, and the opportunity cost of producing this much more in the capital goods is losing this much in consumer goods. So we could say that the opportunity cost for moving from this point to this point, and producing more capital goods, the opportunity cost is relatively small in terms of giving up the production of consumer goods. And this part of the curve right here, now as we move down the curve, and especially as we get down to this part of the curve, that drastically changes. So let's look at that. So let's say we're going to move from this point right here to this point right here. And we can shift this over to here, and we can shift this over real quick. And we can see now that we're still gaining. We're still gaining in the capital goods, but we're only gaining we only have a relatively small gain relative to what we're losing here in consumer goods. So the opportunity cost has, from this part of the curve right here to down here, the opportunity cost to produce more capital goods has drastically increased. So as we move along this curve and produce more and more capital goods, the opportunity cost in consumer goods is gradually increasing. Now, just the opposite is true going the other way. I won't take the time to break that down in detail, but just you can do it on your own. As we move this way on the curve, we're producing more consumer goods, and we're producing less capital goods. So we're giving up capital goods here. So as we move upwards, we're giving up capital goods in order to produce more consumer goods. And at this point in the graph, in the diagram right here, the opportunity cost, what we're giving up in capital goods, is relatively small relative to what we're gaining in consumer goods. And as we move up and get to this part of the curve right here, just the opposite is true. The opportunity cost is much greater in terms of what we have to give up in the capital goods in order to gain a small amount of consumer goods up here. So that's the detailed explanation of why we would answer that we have this diagram right here exhibits increasing opportunity costs for both consumer goods and capital goods. Okay, now B is asking us to redraw the graph up here and show a point that represents fully employed and efficiently used resources on the redrawn graph and label it A. Well, that's easy, right? We just put a point, have a point anywhere. Let me get this out of here. So you're going to draw basically what you see right here, and you can put this point anywhere on the curve that you want, and you can label that A, because that is where we're at full employment and we're utilizing all of our resources efficiently. Okay, so that's part B. Part C, assume there is a recession in Fisherland. On your same graph that we just drew, label as point C a point that would be representing where we would be producing in a recession. And that's, once again, easy, right? Anywhere inside here, anywhere in here. Because anywhere to the southwest of this curve is going to model, or is going to say that we are not utilizing all of our resources efficiently, and we have unemployment. We're not at full employment, and that's how we define a recession. Okay, a recessionary slowdown in the economy. Okay, so that's part C. Now, D, we need to identify a physical policy or action that the official and a government would take in order to address the recession. And that's going to be an expansionary policy. Typically, that's going to take an action that puts money into the money supply. So they would buy bonds. They would buy bonds, because when they buy bonds, the central bank is getting the bonds. Actually, this is a physical policy. Sorry, physical policy. So this would be something that the Congress would do, and that's going to be, or the government, not the a central bank. So they would do something expansionary, and the two main categories would be increasing government spending or cutting taxes. Now the point here, and I want to jump back and I want to look at part E, and then I'm going to jump over to a graph. So we want to assume that no discretionary policy actions are taken, and this is sort of confusing. So I really don't like the way that they ask it, but we're gonna figure it out. So they're asking, will the short run aggregate supply increase, decrease, or remain the same in the long run? Okay, what do they mean? Well, it's easy. You don't have to draw the graph, but I'm going to show you the graph so you know how to answer this, okay? So the first thing we want to know is that because of this recession, let me jump over here. Because of the recession, the aggregate demand in the economy has shifted to the left. Okay, so we have a lower output, right? And we have a lower price level. And so since the aggregate demand shifted to the left, this is what happens in a recession. So the economy is operating below full employment, which is right here, you've got a shift in the aggregate demand curve, and you've got a movement along the line in the short run aggregate supply. So we end up right here. Now, at this point, what they're really getting at in the question is, how do we get back to the long run? How are we going to get back to the long run aggregate supply? How are we going to get back here? Well, what's typically happens here is that wages end up going down because of an oversupply of labor, actually, or unemployment, that in the recession in general drives wages down, and it also drives down other factor input cost. So that's actually going to cause the cost of supply, the cost of short-run supply, to drop. And if the cost of short-run supply decreases, that's going to actually shift the short-run aggregate supply to the right. So the short answer to the question here is that short-run aggregate supply is going to increase. It's going to shift to the right. And then we're going to have a movement along the line of the second aggregate demand, and in the long run, we're going to end up back at a full employment, but at a much lower, or back at the original output Y1, but at a much lower price level. Okay, so you've got a shift, and you've got a shift here. Here, and a movement to here, and then you got a shift here, and a movement to here. Okay, so that's what actually happens. And the reason, again, the short run aggregate supply shifts to the right is because costs have dropped. Factor input, the cost of supply has actually dropped because of the recession. And we're going to end up here, okay? Now, the larger argument here, just so you know, the larger argument, or sort of the argument that's implicit in this question is many economists, especially more conservative economists, argue that the government should not do anything, and we'll end up that the economy ends up in the long run self-adjusting. I just thought I would point that out. Even though there's a lot of people who suffer, especially in terms of unemployment, when the government doesn't take any action at all. Okay, that takes care of question 2. When I come back on the next video, we'll talk about question 3.